Well, hello, and welcome to this afternoon's presentation. I'm Sean Smith, and I'm going to be talking to you about the future and a little bit beyond of printed signage. So if you're not expecting to be here, that's what you're going to be looking at for the next few minutes or so. Oh. If I can control the technology. It's a bit quicker than I am, I think, so it's slower. And what I'm going to be spending a few minutes talking about are some market forecasts that Smithers Pira has produced, looking at volumes and values of different applications for printed signage. Talk about some of the market segmentation and the changes that we're seeing. I'll cover some of the technology developments. But if you sort of have your eyes open as you walk around the show, you'll see rather more up-to-date technology developments than some of the ones that I'm going to be showing. We, as part of a new report we came out, we surveyed a whole range of people. I'll explain who they were, and I'll show you some of their results for that. And we're going to talk a little bit about creativity and innovation in signage and how we think that's going to help the position of digital signage together. So when I'm putting this presentation together, I was very pleased to see that we're now seeing people that produce signage using signage to sell their services and products. Although I suspect these people may not be my preferred partner as a customer, but it takes a very broad church in the signage applications. For those of you who don't know, I'll spend a couple of seconds talking about Smithers Pira. If this clacker would work and my beautiful animation comes across. We're an information supplier based over in the States with some areas in Europe. We deal with a whole range of consultants and associates across the world, across the whole supply chain for print and printed items. And we serve a variety of customers across the world looking at good information on print and printing market areas and all of the ancillary items, aim to help them make better decisions as they go forward with their businesses. We work with a range of well-known brands, but we work in printing, paper, packaging, and we do a lot of stuff on food contact and testing in packaging side. And we work with a variety of suppliers to the trade and users and publishers of the area. So enough about that. Me, why am I here? Well, I'm a print techie, and I've been a print techie for rather more years than I care to remember. And I act as a consultant and researcher for Smithers Pira, and I write a number of their reports. But I don't just do that. I also act as a journalist, and I also sort of keep my fingers slightly dirty as I'm a non-exec at a couple of real printing companies as well. So I've been doing this for a long time, so that's a little bit of my background. Now, what I'm going to be talking to you about, if I could actually point this thing so it did what I wanted it to do, I wouldn't have to keep looking at my screen. I'm going to share some of the findings of a new report that is not yet published. It'll be coming out later this year. I don't quite know when. Depends on our production department. But it's looking at the future of signage over the next 5 years, and it contains a variety of market data looking at the volumes, values, substrates, different print processes, different applications for printed signage. As part of the work we did getting the figures together, we did a major research program talking to printers, brand owners, and also suppliers to the trade, so ink companies. So there may be one or two people I can see there who possibly got asked, I don't know, in there. And we wanted to find out their experiences and attitudes, and we put a whole host of information together when we came up with our factors and our findings. The cover also looks at trends in applications, the rise and fall and re-rise and stabilization of the digital out-of-home signage markets. I'll talk a little bit about those later on. And because I got involved with it, there's a bit about the technology and how the different technologies in use are changing and what the implications of that are going forward. So before we start, a couple of definitions covering which sort of what signage is. Everyone knows what signage is when they see it, but it's not always easy to define it. So we define it as a whole range of things by different applications: posters, banners, building wraps, flags, whatever. But within that, a very significant, important, which I'm going to talk quite a lot of detail about, is point of sale, or if I'm talking to Americans, point of purchase information. And there are lots of indoor, outdoor POS, standing display bins, permanent, temporary shelf markers, whole range of things that are attacking you and attacking your eyes as you wander around any retail environment, and in big supermarkets, you really cannot move for them. There's quite a bit of signage in this hall as well. Not all of it particularly great in providing information, I might add, because that's the other sort of big sector. And of course, everyone knows the importance of signage, but it's getting to the stage now where it should be getting to the stage now where it's getting beyond a joke. So I'm not actually quite sure which of those doors I should be going in. And it would take me a long time to work out which one of those two I was in, particularly if it was in a nightclub. Not that I frequent nightclubs, of course, anymore, going forward. And I particularly like that as an example of very bad signage, except it might be quite good for the producers of the sign. So information is also a significant part of the signage market. Okay. So before we start talking about some data, I'm going to be talking about average run lengths and how those are changing, which seem to be quite an interesting dynamic for that. If anybody wants, if you want a copy of this presentation, you'll have my details at the end. If you just email me or talk to the guys there, they will send it to you to save doing that. But we are very interested in finding out how run lengths are changing and what they are for different practice. So now, if ever anyone from Pira gets in hold of you and talks to you, they will be asking you about run lengths and how they're changing. It's particularly important for the developers of equipment and systems to find out how those are going. And these results are looking at the analog production, analog primarily sheet-fed litho and screen, but there are a bit of flexo in there in terms of freestanding displays and cardboard boxes, and digital, which is virtually all inkjet. There's a few other things in there, but it's virtually inkjet. And you will not be surprised to see that the run length for the digital materials are significantly lower than the average run lengths for analog. When we track these over the years, there is a continual decline in run lengths for virtually all printing projects. What that means is that the digital, which is obviously hugely useful for doing short run economically, is going to take a great deal of share away from the analog vendors. But we still have some significant average run lengths, getting up to 500 in the case of decals and transfers, which are going to be quite small items, so you would probably expect them to be very high. But many of the respondents we had would give us an answer of 1 in those channels as their average run length. Not just they occasionally do 1, but we're now seeing some people just doing single one-offs. They probably might be versions, so there might be a batch of different ones, is not rare anymore. And that's not going to change any time. We think that's quite a useful metric, and it's certainly very valuable when we start doing forecasts to work out who is going to be winning and who is going to be losing. I press this button, and oh, it does happen. And the other, one of the other factors that I thought was useful to be looking at is we asked people we gave them a range of topics and asked them to rank them in terms of importance from 0 to 5, 0 being not important at all, 5 being hugely valuable. We then worked out what the average ratings were, actually 1 to 4, I should say, and ranked the sectors in there. And this is between a variety of buyers of signage and producers and suppliers to it. The key thing is still the requirement for faster turnaround, reduction in lead times. Everyone talks about it. Everyone's demanding more and more of it. It came out highest in the area. Very good news for digital. Not so good news for a screen producer if you have to go through the benefits of producing a screen. Increasing fragmentation of above-the-line media. This reflects back to exactly what we were saying before, is shorter run lengths. More and more items being produced, smaller quantities wanted more and more urgently. As they always say to me, if I wanted it tomorrow, I would have ordered it tomorrow. You have to be extraordinarily responsive in this market. Economics, they quite like better awareness of the importance and how POS or signage works so that you can actually design better signage. Because more appropriate signage that grabs attention is going to be far more useful than boring standard things that are just there making some noise in the background of your head as you look at it. Increasing digital interaction, so we're putting QR codes. People are getting their smartphones and interacting with the signage. And there's some excellent examples as you wander around the show, of course. Growing requirement of short runs, almost taken as norm. And then as you sort of go down, interestingly, less offshoring. Okay, people want things now. You can't really order it from Latin America, where it's a bit cheaper to get it back into Europe, because by the time it comes back, that campaign's dead and buried. A few people, the printers didn't really care about retailer concerns about clutter. They thought it was a very good idea because it's supplying more. But retailers are a bit concerned about the clutter and the things in the store. And I'll show you some of the examples and why we think that's important sort of going forward. Oh, it got me. This has a response a bit. I've got a small dog. He responds slightly better than this clacker does. Right, okay. One of the things that we thought was going to be interesting is when we're looking beyond signage, and it's what types of signage are going to be impacted by digital signage over the next 10 years. And not surprisingly, we have backlit displays, billboards are going to be attacked by the big signs. So as I'm coming in from the airport, I notice in Cologne there are a few big signs that are changing and moving in the background. I was in Lithuania, that happening there, happening all over the place. But as we go through the different areas of them, there are different responses. And a very good number I got was someone saying, well, it's very difficult to put a screen on the outside of a car wrap. So there are going to be some places where print is going to be appropriate and the go-to medium. There are other places where digital signage is going to be far more appropriate, far more useful. And as printers, we can tut about it and complain, but it's not going to change. It's going to be those ones. And these figures from the surveys, and we ranged a load of other ones, were very useful when we come into making forecasts in how the markets are going to develop going forward. So the report contains a lot of information on the market sizing for printed signage, all of the different types that I talked about before. We present the data in terms of value. I'll show you some value figures in a moment. In square meters or million square meters produced. This is global, looking at 2010, 2015, up to 5 years hence. And when we're doing the forecasts, we look at a whole range of activities to try and work out what's going to be winning, what's going to be losing, which are the more economic, which are the less economic, which are going to grow, which are going to drop. And that's sort of by application. Have a quick good look at this, because at the end of the show I'm going to actually quiz you and ask you what those numbers were, so I hope you're paying attention there. Generally, we're seeing growth in the big volume areas, but there's some that we don't think are going to be growing. Billboards. Why don't we think they're going to be growing fast going forward? Unsurprisingly, they're being attacked by digital alternatives, the screens, the large format areas. And when we talk to the people who are selling the media, they're very interested in getting more and more of those types of applications. They don't see them necessarily replacing, but they certainly see them as an important part of the market. But even though that's happening, and we're going to see great growth in that, we're not seeing huge declines in the traditional printed signage for many of those other ones there. So we have a market somewhere in the region of 13 billion square meters. I'm not quite sure how much is in this hall, but it's probably a very, very small drop, even though to me it seems like there's an awful lot of large format signage going around. We look at the same data in a different area. So this is in cash value terms. This is the value of the output of the printers who produce the signage. It doesn't refer to the volume or values of equipment, inks, or substrates. This is the retail or also the sales value from the suppliers. We'll provide this in the report in constant value terms. I quite like constant value terms because it strips out any effects of inflation or any effects of currency fluctuations. And this is global. But we also present this data in local currency and current values. In current values, we see significant increases, but that's primarily the effects of inflation. So we're dividing the market now by different print processes. And perhaps unsurprisingly, we have a couple of negatives. Oh, that's sheet-fed offset, that's screen printing, continuing to decline. They're big, they're significant, but the value of those are declining. And if I happen to be a large format offset producer, what would particularly worry me is that the volumes of offset are not declining, so the average price of offset is declining. New offset presses, new sheet-fed presses are far more productive, far more automated. I'll talk about them in a moment. So you get some efficiencies through that. But as a business model, that would not fill me full of joy for my large format offset device. Screen, we see, well, it's not very good news for screen. It's continuing to be not very good news for screen. It's still important, but the volumes and values going forward are not very attractive. Inkjet, well, that's quite positive. Oh, I've switched it off. It was that positive. Is that me or? Oh, come back again. It probably was me in that case. Well, that was quick. Wasn't quite what I meant to do. It's the one on the market. If you just put one back up, I'll flick it forward or back. I apologize for my technical limitations here. Oh, back where we should have been. Right, I think I'll put this down here because I'm obviously being a bit dangerous with that. So as I say, we see screen declining, but we see inkjet growing. And the volume and the value of inkjet is both positive, although the volume is outperforming the value, which tells me that as inkjet matures, you're going to be reducing the cost. But there are also implications because you're reducing the range of materials and substrates that you can print on. And as inkjet becomes more effective for some paper substrates, which have a necessarily lower value, so it doesn't necessarily mean that the average square meter price across all inkjet are falling. It's there's quite a lot of data behind these top-level figures there that we should be looking at. So that's sort of bored you and beaten you into submission with some figures. So we'll talk about some of the reasons and things that are happening as a consequence or because of what we're seeing for the numbers. We're talking about digital signage. Now, digital signage is incredibly difficult to capture values and volumes for it. Because when you talk to the people who are supplying the screens and supplying the information, they have different matrix and different measurements in terms of number of screens, value of the installation of screens, or the value of the media that's going onto the screens. And that's the figure that we're looking at. When we look at DOOH, digital out of home, is the value of the media for the screen. Fortunately, people like Zenith actually do provide some figures for it, although they're incredibly up and down, and I wouldn't say they're necessarily totally accurate. But taking all that into account, we definitely see that digital signage out of home is continuing to grow across the world as a proportion of the overall advertising expenditure. in Western Europe, the best figures we had for last year in 2014 suggest that the outdoor digital at-home media accounts for 10% of all of the outdoor advertising spend on that. 10 years ago, there was virtually nothing. In 5 or 10 years' time, we don't know what it's going to be, but we don't see it sort of going up into taking 50, 60, 70% of it. We think it'll be perhaps 15, maybe 20%, and that's the value of the media sales in there. It's becoming important. It's an important part of the market, and when you're looking at the way things are developing, you cannot bury your heads in the sand and hope it'll go away, because it won't. It's valuable and it's useful for buyers of media and advertisers, which is why they're using it. And it is definitely taking some share of the printed signage market that used to be done on billboards. Predominantly, I suspect, offset is going to be rather more heavily hit than litho, than inkjet is. Now, if I take my life into my hands and press this very carefully, oh, put it down again. Talk a little bit about the technology. The three main things that we're going to be looking at is going to be screen, inkjet, and sheet-fed litho. There has been a lot of development up till a few years ago in large format or very large format presses, predominantly by Koenig & Bauer, KBA, but also by Man Roland with their XXL. And you can now buy, if you wanted to, a sheet-fed litho press, 1.5 by 205 meters format. Huge, great big things. Very entertaining when you watch somebody carrying a plate to the press, because they're bigger than the man that's carrying the plate, and you see these things walking around. And there's very sharp bits of aluminium, which you want to keep well out of the way of before they get on there. A whole host of very, very good automation aids, control aids built into these presses, making them very cost effective to do runs down to 100, 50, 70 sheets of paper on that. So they're very good at the posters and paper. Huge levels of automation, very good on color control, and still effective for parts of the market. But unfortunately, big segments of that market don't necessarily want to have printed signage anymore. So we don't see a huge amount of growth going forward for the presses, except you'll find that one new press can replace maybe 2 old presses, because they're more automated, easy to set up, and run more straightforwardly. Look at screen. Very big format available. If you go to Tima, you can print 3 meters by 2 meter sheets in 5 or 6 colors. Very good for heavy ink coverages. Very good for really bold black displays where you've got very heavy ink coverages. They're very cost effective. The big problem that you have with screen, and it's been the case for many years, is there are limited opportunities to automate the process from the creative side through to the production. That's a very automated press, but it only goes on the large format at about 500 or 800 sheets an hour. And I don't know how long it'll take you to set up, developing those screens and getting them into register and producing the screens. But you could certainly run an awful lot of stuff off a large format litho machine, large format inkjet press in the area. The production, it's not difficult, but it's laborious and time consuming. And we see that the screen market is still continuing to lose share because the benefits don't give it enough advantages against the alternative areas. So the competition, primarily flatbed inkjet. Now, I thought I'd have a nice picture of a flatbed inkjet machine, but everyone's sort of seen 5 million of them. So I thought I'd see the most interesting one I've ever seen is someone loading an Inca onset onto the back of a truck in Cambridge. And I was very impressed to see this, as I was thinking that's about £1.5 million worth of kit, and I do hope they don't drop it. Although part of me probably thought I would quite like them to drop it, but fortunately they didn't. The quality, the productivity, and the cost performance of these large format presses is improving all the time. And if you talk to Brian in the front there, I'm sure he would not disagree with that. I hope. No, we wouldn't. Good, good, good. We're also seeing lower environmental impact on them. We're seeing UV, we're seeing latex, we're seeing eco-solvent inks. And at the show today, if you go to Durst, you'll see some hybrid water-based UV inks that they're presenting as a new development. You can get very, very large format, lots and lots of competition. There are a couple of new players that I didn't know about in this market who are in whichever hall I happen to be in that I hadn't seen prior to today. And we're now seeing them. The market is mature. It's segmenting, it's doing new things. So we're not just capable of producing a bit of signage anymore. That signage has to do more. We want to get better results out of it. So we're starting to develop things like 3D printing. Now, 3D printing is very sexy and very trendy in the additive manufacturing and that sort of world. But we've been doing it in signage for many, many years. And you get some fantastic effects. And as the people at the sign producers get hold of this technology, they'll put the same design through 30 times to get the 3D representation of a dinosaur fossil on the outside of a brilliant exhibition over in the States. You can add value. You can do things that you just couldn't do with screen or litho anymore. And you're seeing lots and lots of very good examples of innovation going forward. And that's broadening the application, adding value, making the printed signage the physical thing, doing things that you really cannot do on a screen, no matter how good the resolution or the performance or the engine of the screen. And I think that physical, tactile impact that print has is one of its major strengths. It's one that I don't think we should forget too much. So we talk a little bit about the technology, but I was told I'm not allowed to talk about technology too much, so I shan't. So we'll talk a little bit about point of sale and the retail sector. And it's worth noting that the top 10 retailers, including the names that we all know and love, they're huge. $115 trillion in 2013. Now, I didn't count all that, and so I see how much I spend when I go to a supermarket, so I'm not at all surprised. A large supermarket will contain 12,000 items. Now, I don't go around counting them, although I do go around looking at quite a lot of them. And the reason they have that is they say that 70%, some people will say 90%, other people will say slightly less, of purchase decisions of real people are made up when they're in store. That's why printed signage and signage in general is important. Sadly, when people do the research, they find that of that 12,000 items, people notice perhaps 40 of them. So you're wandering around seeing 12,000 things, but ignoring the vast majority of it. And in my case, I'll ignore all of it if I possibly could, except for the red wine, of course, which is vitally important that we get there. So when you only notice 40 out of 4,000, out of 12,000, it's pretty important that it's seen and it's noticed. And it's going to be noticed not because it's glaringly bright, flashing in fluorescent neon orange. It's going to be noticed because it's a good offer. And it's the same in all types of printing, is the content is far more important than the production, despite me as a techie thinking it's the other way around. So remind yourself it's the content that is there. But you then start doing more with it. Give it a promotion, competition, versioning, make it more relevant to the people who are looking at it, and it'll get used, it'll get noticed. And we're seeing a lot of interactivity now. So the QR codes are a little bit passé perhaps, but quizzes, a whole range of things that will enable you to sort of get involved with it. And there's some very good examples at the show of things like movement sensors, so that it actually starts interacting with individual people. We're putting lighting in there. There's a very good one if you have a look in, I think it's in Hall 7, of the people that are making the cardboard furniture. They've got a sort of what you can do your Michael Jarre, Jean-Michel Jarre impersonation if you feel so inclined. But it's sound. If you look at the Hall of Fame on the FESPA Awards, there's an Avalia poster of a drum kit, and when you touch that drum kit, you can turn into Keith Moon, should you so desire. You look at image recognition, eye beacons. We're doing more with the printed signage. In general terms, people are doing lots of small runs of that, very good for the digital, the inkjet side to develop it. But the innovation is making the sign more appropriate, more appealing to individuals, rather than the technology involved in production of it. We're seeing something that really does fill me full of dread. My view on a supermarket is I get in and out as fast as I possibly can, but they're now developing retailtainment. So making it, and this is not I didn't write this, it is designed to be playful, without limits, to drive brand awareness. And that sounds to me a bit like a marketing speak, but as you wander into something at Mother's Day or at Halloween or at Easter, and if you're going to a UK one at Christmas or a US one at Christmas, it's, you will know that the holiday season approaches. But it's enabled by printed signage. And you have, if you go to some of the suppliers, they have warehouses, mocked up stores, and people are really sort of pushing these things through. Big, big business. So you're no longer a printer, you're a retail consultant in that area. I'm not going to press this too many times because I know what's going to happen if I do. Take my life into my hands. So we talked about a little bit about in-store, but it's not just in-store. My daughter is a primary school teacher, and I brought a show to these things, which were produced by a small, independent corrugated house in the UK, and she absolutely loved it. And she's now got in her school half a dozen of these things, and the kids have little books and things, and they sit around as they're teaching sort of kids to read. For that company, a nice little side area. You've got building sort of vehicle wraps and things. I quite like that example, because even I would probably notice that, certainly from afar. You've got printed furniture, the seats over in Hall 7, and areas like that. And the imagination of the people who are doing these things is quite entertaining and quite spectacular. But the result of all of this innovation and the other thing is that it's not enough just to be a printer anymore. You need to have an installation. You put these things in and you take them down and you refresh them. You become part of the marketing campaign. So you're not just a supplier to a retailer or a brand owner. You put your experience in. You develop how they're going to make their campaigns and their applications more efficient and more effective for the marketplace they're looking at. And you're seeing lots of new applications. For the printing side, the printing company side of things, they can add value and they can become really significant partners to many of their customers. And the benefit of adding value is that you don't get beaten up on price all the time. Whereas if you're a standard litho producer of signage or screen producer of signage, there are limits to the added value applications that you can put in. If you want to have a huge building wrap on a football stadium, they don't need very many of those, but they'd, so you're not going to do it on a litho press, but they quite like the idea of refreshing that with whoever their new Lionel Messi or their player of the season is. So, you have to listen to my last slide before I let you go. So all of this research that we've done and all of these things, try to sort of belt it down, the sector is maturing. As you wander around this show, there's some fantastic new add-ons and go faster machines and some new features. But the sector is really pretty mature now. There's no initial breakthroughs that, wow, I've not seen that before at the show. We're seeing signage volumes are up and are going to continue to grow over the next 5 years, although we don't see huge value growth within that. So the value growth for suppliers to the trade are going to be through doing additional services and additional functions, as well as the physical production of the printed signage. The out-of-home digital signage is impacting on the sector, but it's not killing it or replacing it. When we look at the technology, analog, stable in terms of litho volumes, but declining in price, and certainly screen continuing to decline. But inkjet, across the world, there are some areas where it's growing quite rapidly, other areas where it's not quite so quick. In general terms, it's still going to be growing over the next 5 years or so. And for people who are using this thing, I think the message is, well, you know, innovate. Don't just do what you did yesterday. Design some new things, get some new functions, some new features, and impress your customers. Well, I was going to take half an hour. I've actually taken 35 minutes, so I apologize for 5 minutes, but thank you very much indeed for your attention. And if you would like any information or anything like that, please do drop me an email or talk to the organisers, and they'll provide that if it is useful to you.